It was 9:13 p.m. on a rain-slicked Thursday evening, inside the hushed, amber-lit sanctuary of The Gilded Cage, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a reputation. The air smelled of old money, truffles, and quiet arrogance. At a secluded corner table, Dr. Alani Adebayo sat alone, a portrait of serene patience. Her simple but exquisitely tailored silk gown, the color of midnight, flowed over the gentle, perfect curve of her 7-month pregnancy. She wasn't looking at her phone, she was observing a small, intricate painting on the far wall, her art historian's eyes tracing the delicate brushstrokes with a quiet appreciation that seemed entirely out of place in a room where most people came only to be seen. She had been waiting for 45 minutes, yet her composure was flawless. She was a still point in a turning world, an island of calm in an ocean of restless egos. But her stillness was a magnet for stares. Whispers followed her like a shadow every time a waiter passed, the patron speculating on who this solitary black woman could possibly be to command a table that was typically reserved weeks in advance. A soft kick from within reminded her she wasn't truly alone. She smiled, placing a protective hand over her belly, a gesture of such profound and private love that it made the surrounding opulence feel cheap and hollow. That's when Chloe approached. Chloe was 24, with eyes that were older than her years, clouded by a storm of resentment that had been brewing for a long, long time. In her mind, she had already written Alani's story, a gold digger, a mistress, someone playing dress-up in a world she hadn't earned. Every quiet sip of water Alani took, every graceful turn of her head, felt like a personal insult to Chloe, a mockery of her own life, which felt like a frantic scramble up a cliff face while others floated past on a gentle breeze. She moved with a practiced efficiency that masked the tremor in her hands. Without a word, without a warning, Chloe lifted a heavy glass pitcher of ice water and inverted it directly over Alani's head. The collective gasp of the restaurant was swallowed by the shocking sound of water and ice cascading over silk and skin. A shard of ice slid down Alani's neck, leaving a trail of frigid shock. The water, shockingly cold, soaked her hair, her dress, her soul, clinging to her skin like a second, icy layer. The room fell into a silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Every diner was frozen, a tableau of disbelief. Chloe leaned in, her voice a low, venomous hiss meant only for Alani. "Sorry about that," she whispered, the apology a razor blade wrapped in silk. "Sometimes people get in over their heads. This place isn't for everyone." Alani didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or cry out. The water dripped from the ends of her hair onto the pristine white tablecloth, each drop landing with an impossibly loud patter in the dead silence. She slowly raised her eyes to meet Chloe's, and what Chloe saw there terrified her more than any scream could have. There was no fear. No humiliation. Only a deep, ancient calm, as if a slumbering queen had just been disturbed. Alani's hands, steady and deliberate, moved to her purse. The entire room watched, expecting her to pull out a phone to call the police, or perhaps a lawyer. Instead, she retrieved a small, heavy object. It was a single, ornate poker chip, carved from black obsidian, with a silver inlay of an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. She placed it carefully on the table, a stark black circle against the white linen. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not a whisper, but it wasn't a shout. It was perfectly modulated, clear and cold as the ice water still melting on her skin, and it carried to every corner of the silent room. "For the trouble," she said, her eyes locked on Chloe's. "And for the lesson you are about to learn." She stood, her ruined dress clinging to her, the water leaving a trail on the marble floor as she walked toward the exit with the unshakable dignity of a monarch leaving a lesser court. The spell broke. The manager, a man named Philip who prided himself on controlling every detail of his establishment, scrambled after her, apologizing profusely, but Alani didn't even turn her head. As the heavy oak doors swung shut behind her, Chloe was left standing in the center of the room, the empty pitcher still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. The momentary thrill of power had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that coiled in the pit of her stomach. She had expected tears, outrage, a satisfying scene. She had not expected that, control. That chilling promise. She turned to her co-workers, forcing a smirk. Guess she couldn't take the heat, she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. No one smirked back. Outside, the rain had intensified. A sleek, black car, so dark it seemed to absorb the light from the street lamps, pulled up to the curb the moment Alani stepped outside, as if summoned by her very presence. The back door opened, and a man stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. His name was Julian, but the only people who used that name were his wife and his late mother. To the rest of the world, the parts of the world that mattered, he was known only as Silas. He wasn't large or physically imposing, but he moved with a lethal grace, an economy of motion that spoke of immense, contained power. When he saw Alani, soaked and shivering, his face, which was already a mask of stoic calm, became utterly unreadable, a blank slate of terrifying emptiness. He said nothing, simply wrapping her in his own tailored cashmere coat and guiding her into the warmth of the car. Inside, the world was silent, the sound of the city and the rain completely muted. He didn't ask what happened. He simply waited. Alani finally let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the passing city lights. Someone needs to be taught that dignity is not a privilege of wealth or color, she said softly. They need to understand that some actions create ripples they can't possibly imagine. Silas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the restaurant shrinking in the distance. He picked up a secure, encrypted phone and dialed a single number. The voice on the other end was immediate, alert. Silas. Silas's voice was calm, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the cold fury radiating from him. Table 7. The Gilded Cage. A waitress named Chloe. I want to know everything. I don't want to know her sins. I want to know her hopes. I want to know her fears. I want to know what she loves more than anything else in this world. Because that, he paused, his eyes narrowing, is the asset we will be leveraging. For Chloe, the drive home was a blur of flashing traffic lights and the rhythmic slap of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. The manager, Philip, hadn't fired her. In a way, that was worse. He had looked at her with a mixture of terror and pity, his face pale. I don't know who that woman was, he'd stammered, but I suggest you pray she doesn't find out who you are. The words echoed in her mind, each syllable a drop of ice water on her soul. When she walked into the cramped, two-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and her mother's anxiety, the false bravado she had worn like a shield at the restaurant crumbled into dust. Her mother, Maria, was asleep in the recliner, a stack of medical bills on the table beside her, a testament to their constant, losing war. In the other room, her younger brother, Leo, was sleeping. He was 10, but his body was a fragile prison. Spinal muscular atrophy, a cruel, degenerative disease, was slowly stealing his strength, turning his muscles to static. Chloe had been a nursing student, top of her class, fueled by a fierce, desperate need to understand the monster that was consuming her brother. But the tuition bills and Leo's mounting expenses had become an impossible weight, forcing her to trade her textbooks for a waitress's apron and the uniform of a home care aide. By day, she gently cared for the elderly and infirm, her hands skilled and compassionate. By night, she served the city's elite, a corrosive bitterness eating away at her heart with every pop of a champagne cork. She saw the casual waste, the easy laughter, the sheer, unthinking privilege, and she hated it. She hated them. She hated the woman in the midnight dress because she represented everything Chloe couldn't have: ease, grace, and the freedom from the gnawing terror that defined every waking moment of her own life. The next morning, another letter arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope from the insurance company. Chloe opened it with a familiar sense of dread. It was the fifth appeal. The fifth denial for Zolocidin, an experimental treatment that was Leo's only real hope. The words were the same, a sterile corporate eulogy for her brother's future, not medically necessary, experimental, out of network. She crumpled the letter, the paper a flimsy stand-in for the faceless executives who had just signed her brother's death warrant. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, choking poison in her throat. This was why she was so angry. It wasn't just envy. It was a primal scream against a system that could spend millions developing a drug only to lock it behind a golden door that families like hers could never hope to open. She looked at Leo, awake now, sketching superheroes in a notebook, his own small body so unlike the powerful figures he drew. The injustice of it all threatened to tear her apart. Meanwhile, in a sterile, soundproof office overlooking the city from 60 floors up, Silas reviewed the file on his screen. It was titled, Chloe Miller. Every detail of her life was laid bare, her 4.0 GPA in nursing school, her crippling student debt, her father's fatal hit-and-run 2 years prior by a driver with diplomatic immunity. Every bill, every denial, every tear-soaked night was quantified in cold, hard data. He scrolled to a section labeled Assets. It listed only one, Leo Miller, brother. He zoomed in on the medical file, on the name of the drug, Zolocitane. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Get me the board of Viridian Pharmaceuticals," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The men and women of the board, scattered across the globe, were patched through within 90 seconds. They knew Silas not as a mafia boss, but as the silent, majority shareholder of the holding company that owned their entire corporation, a ghost in the machine who had never before shown any interest in the day-to-day operations. "There is a clinical trial for Zolocitane," Silas stated, his voice flat. "I am adding a candidate. The funding will come from the Croft Foundation's discretionary medical fund. He is to be accepted immediately. The lead physician will be Dr. Isabella Rossi. You will fly her in from Zurich. No expense will be spared. This is not a request." He disconnected the call before they could even process what had happened. He then made a second call. "I need a letter sent. From the Croft Foundation. It's an invitation." 3 days later, another thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at Chloe's apartment. She almost threw it away, assuming it was another bill, another denial. But her mother opened it. A moment later, a strangled sob echoed through the small apartment. Chloe rushed in to see her mother on her knees, the letter clutched in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. Chloe snatched it from her. The letterhead was elegant, embossed with a simple, silver Ouroboros. It was from the Croft Foundation. It said that Leo had been selected from a national database of candidates for a fully funded, comprehensive clinical trial for Zolocitane. All costs would be covered. The lead physician would be Dr. Isabella Rossi, a name Chloe knew from her studies, a near-mythical figure in the world of pediatric neurology. It was a miracle. A divine, impossible intervention. A lottery ticket she didn't even know she was holding. Chloe read the letter again and again, the words blurring through her own tears of disbelief and overwhelming joy. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her chest lifted. Hope, bright and blinding, flooded the dark corners of her world. They were saved. Leo was saved. Then, she read the final paragraph. "The trial requires a temporary relocation to our state-of-the-art residential treatment facility for the initial 6-week intensive phase. All accommodations and living expenses will be provided. Your point of contact and lead patient advocate, who will manage every aspect of Leo's care and your family's transition, will be the head of our foundation's patient outreach program." At the bottom of the page was the name, typed in elegant, serif font, followed by a direct phone number. Dr. Alani Adebayo. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from Chloe's lungs. The name was a phantom, a ghost from that rainy Thursday night, now inexplicably linked to her family's salvation. The blinding hope of a moment ago was now tainted with a sickening, terrifying confusion. The woman whose dignity she had tried to shatter, the woman she had drenched in ice and insults, was not just a stranger. She was the gatekeeper to her brother's life. For 2 days, the letter sat on the kitchen table, a beacon of hope for her mother and a symbol of damnation for Chloe. Maria was a whirlwind of joyful activity, packing their few precious belongings, calling relatives with the unbelievable news, her voice lighter and happier than Chloe had heard it in years. Leo was cautiously optimistic, his sketches now filled with superheroes who could regenerate and heal. And Chloe watched it all, a silent scream trapped in her chest. Every laugh from her mother, every hopeful glance from her brother, was another turn of the screw. How could she make that call? How could she speak to Dr. Adebayo, knowing what she had done? The alternative, however, was unthinkable. To refuse this chance would be to condemn her brother. Her hatred had led her to commit a monstrous act. Now, her shame was threatening to compound the tragedy by destroying her family's only chance for a future. Her secret was a poison, and the only antidote was to swallow her pride and dial the number. On the third day, her hands shaking so violently she could barely press the numbers, she made the call. It rang twice. A calm, warm voice answered. "This is Alani Adebayo." Chloe's own voice was a dry, cracking whisper. "My name is Chloe Miller. My brother. Leo." There was a pause on the other end, not of surprise, but of patient expectation. "Of course, Ms. Miller. I was expecting your call. We are all very excited about Leo's case. Dr. Rossi believes he is an ideal candidate." The professionalism was a physical blow. Chloe had rehearsed 1,000 frantic apologies in her head, but Alani's calm, clinical tone made them all feel absurd. She was being treated not as a perpetrator, but as a case file. "Dr. Adebayo, about the other night, at the restaurant. I am so sorry. I don't know what." Alani cut her off, not unkindly, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. "Ms. Miller, my only concern right now is your brother's health and your family's successful transition into the program. We can schedule your intake for Tuesday. A car will be sent for you at 9 a.m. Please have your brother's medical records ready. Do you have any questions about the clinical trial protocol?" Chloe was stunned into silence. It was a masterful move, a complete reframing of their relationship. Alani wasn't offering forgiveness, she was erasing the need for it on a professional level, which was somehow infinitely more punishing. Chloe was no longer the aggressor, she was a supplicant, a beneficiary of a system of grace she could not comprehend, orchestrated by the very woman she had targeted. The rest of the conversation was a blur of logistics. When Chloe hung up, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. She hadn't been punished. She had been managed. The following Tuesday, a black town car, identical to the one she'd seen outside the restaurant, arrived. They moved into their new residence. It wasn't a sterile hospital wing or a drab corporate apartment. It was a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows, art on the walls that Chloe recognized from her mother's art history books, and a fully stocked kitchen. It was more luxurious than the Gilded Cage. A beautiful, opulent prison where Chloe was to live out her sentence of guilt. An hour after they arrived, Dr. Alani Adebayo knocked on the door. She was radiant, dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, her pregnancy more pronounced now, a symbol of the life she carried, a life Chloe had so carelessly disregarded. Maria rushed to her, thanking her with tears in her eyes. Leo, shy but curious, showed Alani his sketchbook. Alani knelt down, her voice soft and genuinely kind as she praised his drawings, treating him not as a patient, but as a young artist. Chloe stood by the window, watching, feeling like a ghost haunting her own family's salvation. Alani finally turned to her. Her expression was polite, professional, but her eyes held a knowing depth that stripped Chloe bare. "Ms. Miller. I'm glad you and your family are settling in. It's too much," Chloe stammered, gesturing vaguely at the luxurious apartment. Alani's smile was slight, but it held a universe of meaning. The Foundation believes that a healing environment is essential for recovery. Stress, you see, can be a significant impediment to health. We strive to remove all external stressors for our families, so they can focus solely on getting better. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, a subtle reminder of the stress and humiliation she had inflicted on Alani. This wasn't charity, it was a lesson, taught with surgical precision. Later that afternoon, they all gathered around a large monitor for a video conference with Dr. Rossi from Zurich. The doctor was brilliant, explaining the complex gene therapy with a clarity that gave Maria and Chloe immense confidence. The procedure has a very high success rate, Dr. Rossi explained, her voice crisp with a Swiss accent. But there is one complication we must address immediately. Leo has a rare blood antigen, Rh-omega. During the most critical phase of the treatment, he will require a platelet transfusion from a compatible donor to prevent rejection. It's a precautionary measure, but a non-negotiable one. Maria looked confused. So we just get the blood from a blood bank? Dr. Rossi's expression grew serious. Unfortunately, no. The antigen is so rare that we have found 0 compatible donors in the international registry. We have initiated a regional search, but the odds are formidable. We will need to find a living donor, someone who is a perfect match, within the next 4 weeks, or we cannot proceed with the treatment. The air in the room grew cold. The miracle, once so certain, now hung by a single, invisible thread. The vast, global resources of the Foundation, the brilliance of the world's best doctor, the millions of dollars being spent, all of it was meaningless without this one, impossible thing, a perfect match. Chloe's blood ran cold. She looked at Alani, whose face was a mask of calm, professional concern. But Chloe saw something else flicker in her eyes, a flash of calculated intent. This wasn't an unforeseen complication. This was part of the design. The lesson wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chloe thought the hardest part was facing the woman she wronged. She was tragically mistaken. The true price for her brother's life, she was beginning to understand, was not going to be paid with money or apologies, but with something far more profound. Do you think this is justice, or is it a form of psychological torture far crueler than any simple revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you need to know what happens next, smash that like button, because the reveal will change everything. It was a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows, art on the walls that Chloe recognized from her mother's art history books, and a fully stocked kitchen. It was more luxurious than the Gilded Cage. A beautiful, opulent prison where Chloe was to live out her sentence of guilt. An hour after they arrived, Dr. Alani Adebayo knocked on the door. She was radiant, dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, her pregnancy more pronounced now, a symbol of the life she carried, a life Chloe had so carelessly disregarded. Maria rushed to her, thanking her with tears in her eyes. Leo, shy but curious, showed Alani his sketchbook. Alani knelt down, her voice soft and genuinely kind as she praised his drawings, treating him not as a patient, but as a young artist. Chloe stood by the window, watching, feeling like a ghost haunting her own family's salvation. Alani finally turned to her. Her expression was polite, professional, but her eyes held a knowing depth that stripped Chloe bare. Ms. Miller. I'm glad you and your family are settling in. It's too much, Chloe stammered, gesturing vaguely at the luxurious apartment. Alani's smile was slight, but it held a universe of meaning. The Foundation believes that a healing environment is essential for recovery. Stress, you see, can be a significant impediment to health. We strive to remove all external stressors for our families, so they can focus solely on getting better. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, a subtle reminder of the stress and humiliation she had inflicted on Alani. This wasn't charity, it was a lesson, taught with surgical precision. Later that afternoon, they all gathered around a large monitor for a video conference with Dr. Rossi from Zurich. The doctor was brilliant, explaining the complex gene therapy with a clarity that gave Maria and Chloe immense confidence. The procedure has a very high success rate, Dr. Rossi explained, her voice crisp with a Swiss accent. But there is one complication we must address immediately. Leo has a rare blood antigen, Rh omega. During the most critical phase of the treatment, he will require a platelet transfusion from a compatible donor to prevent rejection. It's a precautionary measure, but a non-negotiable one. Maria looked confused. So we just get the blood from a blood bank? Dr. Rossi's expression grew serious. Unfortunately, no. The antigen is so rare that we have found 0 compatible donors in the international registry. We have initiated a regional search, but the odds are formidable. We will need to find a living donor, someone who is a perfect match, within the next 4 weeks, or we cannot proceed with the treatment. The air in the room grew cold. The miracle, once so certain, now hung by a single, invisible thread. The vast, global resources of the Foundation, the brilliance of the world's best doctor, the millions of dollars being spent, all of it was meaningless without this one, impossible thing, a perfect match. Chloe's blood ran cold. She looked at Alani, whose face was a mask of calm, professional concern. But Chloe saw something else flicker in her eyes, a flash of calculated intent. This wasn't an unforeseen complication. This was part of the design. The lesson wasn't over. It was just beginning. Chloe thought the hardest part was facing the woman she wronged. She was tragically mistaken. The true price for her brother's life, she was beginning to understand, was not going to be paid with money or apologies, but with something far more profound. Do you think this is justice, or is it a form of psychological torture far crueler than any simple revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you need to know what happens next, smash that like button, because the reveal will change everything. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion nightmare. Hope dwindled with each passing day, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of panic. The Croft Foundation launched a massive, public donor drive for Leo. His face, hopeful and brave, was suddenly on billboards and news segments. The slogan, "A hero needs a match," was plastered across the city. It was a masterclass in public relations, a beautiful, elaborate performance of a search for something Silas already knew didn't exist. Chloe and her mother worked themselves to exhaustion, manning phone banks, sharing posts until their fingers were numb, pleading with strangers on the street to get tested. For her mother, it was an act of desperate hope. For Chloe, it was an act of penance. She was a cog in a beautiful, cruel machine, forced to participate in a charade designed to break her spirit. Each negative result, felt like a personal judgment from the universe. Finally, with only a week left before the deadline, Chloe shattered. She found Alani in the penthouse's small, private library, reviewing documents. "Stop it," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with a rage born of pure despair. Alani looked up, her expression calm. "Stop what, Ms. Miller?" "This. All of this." Chloe's voice rose, cracking. "This whole show. The donor drives, the news reports, you know, don't you? You've known from the beginning that there's no match. You're dangling this cure in front of my family just so you can be the one to rip it away. This is my punishment. Just admit it." She was panting, tears of fury and helplessness streaming down her face. Alani didn't move. She simply watched Chloe, her gaze steady, until the frantic energy in the room subsided, leaving only the sound of Chloe's ragged breathing. "Desperation can make us see conspiracies where there are none, Ms. Miller," Alani said softly, her voice devoid of accusation. "It can make us believe the world is a stage set for our own personal tragedy. But the world is far more complex than that." She picked up a thick file from her desk. "My team has not been idle. When the public search yielded no results, I authorized them to begin a deep-dive genealogical trace, following the unique genetic markers of the Rh omega antigen. It was unconventional and expensive. But we felt it was necessary." She opened the file. "The antigen is linked to a very specific, very isolated bloodline. The search led us to some unexpected places. Not medical databases. Prison records." Chloe's heart stopped. Our researchers have found one, and only one, potential living match in the entire country. Alani slid a photograph across the polished mahogany desk. It was a mugshot of a man with tired, haunted eyes, eyes that Chloe saw every morning in her own mirror. His name is Marcus Miller. He is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole at Northgate Federal Penitentiary. Chloe sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. No, she breathed. That's not possible. My father is dead. He died when I was 16. He didn't die, Ms. Miller. He was incarcerated, Alani said, her voice gentle but firm. According to our records, he was convicted of the murder of a union official 20 years ago. He told your mother to tell you and Leo he was gone, to protect you from the truth. The truth. The word was a lie. Her whole life had been a lie. The father she had mourned was alive, a convicted murderer locked in a cage. And he was the only person on earth who could save her brother. We can petition the prison, Chloe said, her mind grasping at straws. For a medical transfer, a donation. Alani slowly shook her head. Federal policy is explicit. Inmates serving life sentences for violent felonies are not eligible for compassionate or medical leave for elective procedures of this nature. It would take an act of God. So, what then? Chloe whispered, her voice hollow. It's impossible. This was all for nothing. Not an act of God, Alani corrected her softly. An act of executive clemency. A full pardon from the governor. She let the weight of that impossibility hang in the air for a moment before she continued. My team, being as thorough as they are, also investigated the details of your father's case. He was a union organizer for a large construction firm, wasn't he? He was fighting against their unsafe labor practices. The man he was convicted of killing was the key witness in a federal racketeering case against the company's owner, a man named Sterling Vance. Alani slid another set of documents across the desk. They were sworn affidavits, retracted witness statements, and financial records detailing payoffs. Sterling Vance framed your father. The evidence was fabricated, the witnesses were coerced. Your father was innocent. He refused a plea deal because he believed the justice system would protect him. He was wrong. Chloe stared at the papers, at the proof of a life stolen, a family destroyed. Her father wasn't a monster. He was a victim. Who would do this? Vance was a ruthless man, Alani said, her voice turning cold. But he was also just a pawn. He worked for a much larger, much more powerful syndicate. Years ago, he made a mistake. He crossed a man who believes that all debts are eventually paid. Alani's eyes locked with Chloe's. That syndicate, the one Vance worked for, also owned the shell corporation that shielded the driver involved in your father's hit and run. The driver with diplomatic immunity who was spirited out of the country before he could be charged. All the broken pieces of Chloe's life, all the senseless tragedies, suddenly snapped into place, revealing a single, horrifying picture. It wasn't random chance. It was a design. This has all been connected, Chloe breathed in dawning horror. From the very beginning. Yes, Alani said. And my husband now owns all of Sterling Vance's companies, his assets, his debts, and his secrets. She pushed the file containing the proof of Marcus Miller's innocence toward Chloe. The Croft Foundation has a certain amount of influence. We can ensure this file, along with a recommendation for an immediate pardon, reaches the governor's desk by morning. Your father could be a free man by the end of the week. The relief that washed over Chloe was so powerful it was dizzying. Freedom for her father. Life for her brother. It was a miracle beyond imagining. But she saw the look in Alani's eyes. This wasn't the end. This was the final negotiation. But? Chloe asked, her voice barely audible. There's a condition, isn't there? Alani leaned forward, her expression no longer professional or clinical, but intensely personal. Your father's freedom and your brother's life are on this table. We are offering you both. But in return, she paused, her voice dropping, we require something from you. Chloe braced herself, expecting a demand for money, for servitude, for a public shaming. She would have agreed to anything. Alani's voice was quiet, but it landed with the force of a tectonic shift. We do not want your apology, Ms. Miller. Words are easy. We require a permanent, binding act of empathy. She slid a university course catalog across the table. You will re-enroll in nursing school. You will finish your degree. The foundation will cover every cost, removing the financial burdens that forced you to quit. You will become the brilliant, compassionate nurse you were always meant to be. This was the first part of the price. Chloe stared, uncomprehending. Then, Alani continued, her eyes intense, upon your graduation, you will become the chief administrator of a new initiative. The Miller Family Clinic. The foundation is breaking ground next month in the poorest district of this city. It will be a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to providing elite medical care to families who, like yours, have been abandoned by a broken system. You will fight for them. You will look into the eyes of desperate parents, and you will be the one with the power to say yes. You will spend the rest of your life ensuring no one ever feels the helpless rage you felt. Alani leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Your punishment, Chloe, is not to be destroyed. It is to be redeemed. We are sentencing you to a lifetime of grace. Chloe finally broke. The sobs that racked her body were not of grief or fear, but of a profound, soul-shattering catharsis. It wasn't a punishment. It was a purpose. A path back to the person she had lost long ago. Through her tears, she nodded. Yes. The events that followed moved with breathtaking speed. The file landed on the governor's desk. 2 days later, Marcus Miller walked out of Northgate Penitentiary, a free man, into the arms of the children who had thought he was a ghost. The reunion was a collage of tears and 2 decades of unspoken words. A week later, he donated his platelets. Leo's treatment was a resounding success. The following fall, Chloe walked back onto her old university campus, her old cynicism burned away, replaced by a quiet, formidable determination. 3 years later, the Miller Family Clinic opened its doors. It was a beacon of hope in a neighborhood accustomed to neglect. Chloe, no longer a waitress but a leader, ran it with a fierce compassion forged in the fires of her own past. Her father, Marcus, managed the community outreach, his tired eyes now shining with purpose. Leo, a healthy, thriving teenager, volunteered after school, sketching superheroes for the sick children. One rainy Thursday evening, a familiar black car pulled up. Silas and Alani stepped out, holding the hand of their young daughter. They walked through the bustling clinic, a place where dignity was the primary diagnosis. Alani met Chloe's gaze across the waiting room. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that silent acknowledgement, the entire story was told. The lesson had been taught. The debt had been paid. Chloe had learned that the ultimate power wasn't the ability to harm, but the strength to heal. And Silas, watching his wife and child, had affirmed his own silent creed, that the greatest revenge is not to destroy your enemy, but to painstakingly rebuild them into someone worthy of your forgiveness.